Hello, everyone, and welcome to the First Base Live of 2021. I am Liz Prue, VP of Marketing here at Base, and I am so excited to introduce you all to our two featured guests today. I'm pretty sure 95% of you know these folks already, but let's go ahead and do some introductions. Moderating today's chat is our very own Paige McFeely, co-founder and CEO at Base. Hello, Paige.
Hello, everyone.
And we could not think of a better guest to kick off the new year with than our partner, C-Suite Executive Assistant, author, and podcast host, Jeremy Burrows. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Liz. Happy to be here.
Today's topic, you guys, is game-changing questions to ask your executive. So this is, I know we've touched on this a little bit at past Base Live events. Jeremy, you talk about this all the time. But being that it is a new year and 2021, I think we're all a little bit more ambitious than we usually are at the beginning of a new year to just like kick this year's butt. So we're really going to get into it. I will go behind the scenes while Paige and Jeremy have a discussion. Paige does have to hop off at 12:30, so we're going to get right into it. And then we'll do a Q&A with Jeremy afterwards. So make sure to drop all your questions and comments in the chat. I will be monitoring that, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible at the end. And with that, I will go ahead and go behind the curtain and let you guys rock and roll. Sound good?
Yeah. Thank you, Liz, and hello, everybody. We're so excited to have this conversation today. Like many of you, I know that I am very, very glad to say goodbye to 2020 and welcome in a new year. So I know a lot of things have not changed yet, but I think we are getting there. We are getting back to some sense of normalcy pretty soon. So today we're going to talk about how do we set ourselves up for success in the new year or at any point in time, particularly through the lens of game-changing questions. So I know many of us have already had our annual reviews. For some of us, they may still be on the way depending on when your fiscal year lands. But wherever you are in the process, I always find that a new year is a great time for reflection, process improvement, and really to have important conversations. Everybody's really ready to do this. Sometimes even an important conversation with yourself about your role. So to kick us off, I want to kick it over to Jeremy and see, how do you prepare for a new year? And are there anything that you and your executive do in particular as you enter in a new season, particularly a new year?
Yeah, thanks, Paige. Hey, everyone. Happy New Year. Excited to be here today. One of the big things we do is I do a calendar audit, and I know the Base software tool has a good way to do that quickly. But I take that calendar audit and I make a report for the whole entire 2020. And I did this right before the holidays. And I said, all right, hey, here's the rundown of your 2020 events. Here's how many meetings you had with sales, external sales meetings. Here's how many internal meetings. Here's how many investor meetings. Here's how many media interviews. And then I put it side by side with his 2019 numbers so that he could compare. Because we had the same conversation last year, and he's like, I just was in too many meetings. I wanted more focus time. So I was able to show the data that, okay, we actually increased your focus blocks, X amount of percentage in 2020. And so we were able to kind of talk through that and think, all right. So I asked him a question like, okay, the data says that you've had more focus time. Do you feel like you've had more focus time?
Yeah.
And that really helped us kind of get into what we want to do in 2021.
Yeah, I love the side-by-side comparison too, especially coming out of a year that we just had. So it felt different no matter what, but to be able to look at the empirical data, I think is so helpful. What are you doing to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, your role, your growth in tandem with all the things that you're doing to help your executive make sure he's doing that?
Yeah, I like to. One thing that I'm really lucky to be working with my executive, because he's very strict on his boundaries. So he has a 24-hour straight, no Slack, no email, no work, Sabbath on the weekends. And so he's very, very good at keeping that, which makes it very easy for me to keep my boundaries, because I'm not like, oh, is he going to bug me? Is he going to call me? Am I going to get a text? I can just check out and enjoy my time off. And that's been the biggest help, is to just kind of mirror his schedule when it comes to the boundaries on the nights and weekends. And that just helps me stay sane.
Yeah, that's great. And the expectation isn't for you to carry the load when he's checked out too, to make sure.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's basically permission. It's permission to say it's okay to log off. Things aren't going to fall apart.
Right. I'm always very, very thankful that I don't work in a life or death industry for that very reason, to be able to just check out and unwind and know that even if something is urgent, it's probably not that urgent. It can wait till Monday. So I know we've gotten a lot of questions come through in advance of helping people to think through how they advocate for themselves. So there's kind of two sides to this, of asking thoughtful questions to your executive, but then also asking thoughtful questions to yourself that you can then bring to your executive and make sure that you're crafting your setup the way that you want it to. So for example, if you want to raise, be prepared to think about, why do you deserve that raise? What data can you provide to make sure to say, like, look at this case, look at the value I've added to this business. But then I think that something that is really hard to do is tying that to how do you actually bring that to reality? You might prepare all of this, but then how do you ask the question well? And I know that that's something that you've done yourself. Any tips for people before we get into the specific questions that to ask, of how to prepare to ask the question and maybe present it in a good way?
Yeah, you mean specifically the question about compensation? Is that what you're?
Well, I think more so of like crafting your role into what you want it to be, as we think back on this year and how it's gone well, and maybe things that we would want to change. How do you turn that self-reflection into action that can set you up for success?
Yeah.
Then we can get into the specific questions.
Yeah, I think the key is, whenever you're trying to prepare for that conversation and ask for what you want, as far as how your role is going to look in the new year, just don't make it about you. Like, make it about them. Make it about how you want to help them, have the role they want. You know what I mean? Like, it's like they probably like, if your executive, your CEO is anything like the CEOs I've worked with, there are certain things that they love to do, and there are certain things that they absolutely can't stand or would rather, cut their finger off than do. And so how can you help them do more of what they love, and make the changes, present the changes that you want to make in that light? And I think it'll go a lot better for then shifting your role the way you would like it to be, and saying, listen, I want to help you do this, and here are some changes that I think we can make to get us there. And the byproduct is that your job becomes more what you want it to be as well. Yeah,
I love that. Well, that's actually a really good segue into shifting into what do we actually ask? So great rule number one is putting it through the lens of something that your executive's not only going to be able to relate to and understand, but then likely be able to take action on based on how you framed it for them. And I think there's so many ways to go about having these types of conversations on a whole spectrum of comfort levels when it comes to having conversations that maybe involve tough questions, especially if they're about us and what we're asking for. But I think no matter what you're asking, we all need to be comfortable knowing that we're worth it, and we deserve to ask these tough questions, even if they make us feel uncomfortable. So I want to talk for a couple of minutes about some examples of game-changing questions that you've seen, both through the lens of consistently asking your executive to up-level your game, but also specific things like when it comes to a new year or new responsibilities or a change in your title or expectations.
Yeah, I think so. I've got 5 questions that I wanted to share today, and they all kind of fall under that umbrella of, how help me help you is kind of the theme.
Yes.
So the first one is, what's one thing that I can do this week to make your life less stressful? And so get very
good
very nitty gritty, very like, we like quick results. We like things to happen now. So don't just generally and vaguely say, what's something I can do this year? Say, what's one thing I can do this week that would really take some of the stress off your plate and really help you out. Now, as with all of these questions I'm going to share, my pro tip is two things that I want you to kind of wear glasses or look through these questions. Look at these questions through this lens, these two lenses. So the first one is, questions are not a sign of weakness. So get it out of your head that you asking questions shows that you're weak and that you don't know everything. Because the truth is, nobody knows everything, and the real leaders are the ones that admit that and are willing to ask questions. Even if the question is, how do I do that? That's okay. So that's the first thing. Questions are not a sign of weakness. The second thing is, know or come up with an answer to the question before you ask it. So a lot of times people make a mistake of, oh, here's the questions to ask, and then they just sit there and it's crickets because their executives kind of wasn't prepared for it, or doesn't know what to say, or doesn't know how to say it in the right way, or whatever. So you need to always be ready to chime in and say, oh, well, here's something that I've seen that I thought could help.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things, just to jump in real quick, that for one, that's when decision string can be really helpful, because you're thinking of not just one potential response, but usually a handful of them. And that makes it a lot easier for the executive to say, this one, not that one, instead of having to come up with it from scratch. But another thing that we talk a lot about here at Base is thinking of the next question. So if I ask this question, what might the potential response be? And then what might the follow-up question for my executive be beyond that? And that's where the executive really starts to feel like you are looking around corners and you're being super strategic, and finds the value in the questions that you're asking, to further your first point about how questions are a really good thing to do.
Yeah, and so for this first one, what's one thing I can do this week? Have a couple of ideas and a couple of things. Look at their calendar this week. See if there's a meeting that they're like probably not looking forward to, that maybe you could sit in the meeting for them instead. So, again, have suggestions before you ask the question. And then the second one would be, if you could snap your finger and instantly change something about your calendar, what would you change? This is a good way to, again, you need to have some ideas already, but this is a good way to really make them think like, all right, if I could wave my magic wand and do anything I wanted to my calendar, what would it be? Well, funny thing happened to me this week, where a couple years ago, as I set up my executive, as we started working together, and I set up his ideal week calendar, which I talk about in my book, and it's a pretty, like, time blocking and ideal week is a common strategy. But basically, I was setting this up for him, and I was like, you need to have one whole day of no meetings. And we tried to do it for a little bit. It kind of fell off, whatever. Well, fast forward 4 years. Last week, my executive texted me. He's like, hey, one thing I was thinking about is trying to have one full day of no meetings. And I was like, that's great. Sounds good. Let's make it happen. So anyway, that's something that he kind of, because we are always talking about this, I didn't even have to ask the question. He was just like, man, if I could snap my fingers, I would want one whole day where I could just focus and not be in meetings.
Yeah. I love that.
Another one I love is, what's keeping you up at night? This one, again, you may have some ideas of what they're concerned about, but you may not. They may say, well, I'm not sleeping because I bought a bunch of Tesla stock and I'm nervous that it's going to tank, or I bought some Bitcoin and I don't know what's going to happen. But, but it could also be related to their job, and it could be, we've got to make this hire ASAP. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to scale, or otherwise I'm going to have to, I'm going to have 15 direct reports forever if I can't find, a chief operating officer to take over half of them. And so what's keeping them up at night? That's a good way to kind of trigger those things that are concerning to them. And then that helps you get inside their mind. People always talk about, well, assistants have to read my mind, or I want them to read my mind. And it's like, I've heard some people talk about how they don't like it. They don't like people talking about how assistants should read minds and whatever, because it's impossible. But it's really, I think it's kind of silly to think in that way, because really reading your mind is basically just asking them questions, getting things out of their head. And then you're absorbing that information. That's reading their mind. And so that's what these questions are doing as well. And then another question is, what are your top 3 priorities for the next 6 months? So this is a kind of a step back so that you can be proactive and you can anticipate farther ahead. Okay, what do you really, really, really care about for the next 6 months? And what are those 3 things? And then what this usually does, when I have this conversation with my executive, what this does is this allows me to know if the timing is right for me to take off my investment, capital raise hat and put on my sales hat, or take off my sales hat and put on my HR hat. Whatever it is that he really cares about for those 6 months, I can kind of shift my priorities as well. And one of the biggest things that this can help you do is make better decisions about their calendar. So if you know that they really care about for the next 6 months, they really care about sales, well, you might break that no meetings rule. If there's a big, VP at Walmart that wants to meet about some big contract, like, you're going to break that no meetings rule to make that meeting happen, because that's their priority over the next 6 months.
Yeah, I love that. And that's something we talk so much about too, and have had some Base Live events about really aligning yourself with your executive's goals and objectives, whatever framework that might be, OKRs or MITs. And that needs to happen on the grand scale, like 6 months, and then also on the weekly scale, which I love that, because that can help you point them as an arrow where they need to go. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you always revisit. That's why these questions aren't I never call them a performance review question list, because they're ongoing, one-on-one check-in questions throughout the year. The true leader assistants who lead their executives and don't just sit around and wait for them to tell them what to do are always bringing these up and always having that conversation throughout the year. And it's funny, the assistants that I talk to who do this, they're the ones that are not intimidated by their annual review, or they're not intimidated by their performance review process. Why? Because they've had these conversations throughout the year, and it's not just some big one-off, define the relationship conversation that they've been waiting all year for.
Yeah, it's incremental. Mm-hmm.
So the 5th question, this one's a fun one. In what ways do I frustrate you? Now, this can be, and then you can kind of do a sub question of how would you recommend I change? So there are probably, it's just like anytime you're in a long-term relationship, whether it's with a partner, whether it's with a friend, whether it's with a roommate or your executive or a coworker, there are things that you learn about them, or maybe habits that they have, or quirks that are kind of annoying, or that get on your nerves, or just are so frustrating to deal with. Well, this kind of question is vulnerable. It seems very vulnerable, and it is. But if you come to the question again with the suggestion of like, okay, this is what I think I do. I think I do this, and I think that this can kind of frustrate them, get on their nerves. So let me give you an example. My last executive, I asked this question, and he said, we had been working together for a couple of years, and he said, what's really frustrating is you keep pinging me throughout the week for all these little minor decisions. And he's like, every time you do that, it just kind of gets me out of the zone or distracts me from what I'm working on. And so he said, what if we just kind of, instead of you pinging me throughout the week, what if you just put together a list throughout the week? And then every time we sit down and meet, we just kind of go through and knock them out. Well, that whole process just changed my career as an EA, because I've done that with every executive I've worked with, and they all love it and prefer it. And other assistants that I've told have implemented that process, and it's just a game-changing process, because guess what? Every time you get distracted, it takes 17 or 20 minutes to get back on task. And as long as it's not urgent, time sensitive, there's no reason you can't wait until the next one-on-one meeting. But it also gives you more power to come in and say, hey, it gives you more influence to say, hey, we really need our one-on-one meeting, because I haven't been bugging you all week with all these little details. So I just need 15 minutes to kind of knock them all out.
Yeah, I know. I see some of the comments coming in here too, saying if you can actually get the one-on-one time with your executive, and what we see a lot of our users do, including my assistant Natalie, that is so helpful, is she'll aggregate all of those little questions and blockers that she may have throughout the day, and unless they're time sensitive, she drops it into a daily digest at the end of the day through decision stream. Mine usually comes between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, but some people like it in the morning. And so I can just go through the decision stream, hit the responses that she's prepared for me, and then it's done. And then that way, now we use our one-on-ones, which we just moved to Friday starting this year. So we'll see how that goes, Friday from Monday. But we use that to do a calendar review coming up to say, how am I feeling about these meetings? What does winning look like for the week, the upcoming week for me? Where did I find success this week? What could have gone better? So we can recalibrate and not spend a bunch of our time talking about those tactical things. Those are 5 really, really good questions. One of the ones that my husband and I always do, which you got to be in an open frame of mind to do this, is what can I do more of this year? And what can I do less of this year? Yeah. And it reminds me of the last one, where you need to be ready to hear anything when you get those questions, but it's helpful, definitely helpful. Before I jump, I want to share a couple of examples too that I've seen work really well, particularly with Natalie, because she and I work so closely together. So there are a couple of things. I've talked already about her daily digest process that she uses, and she mixes in those tactical questions of, who needs to attend this meeting, or we need to reschedule this, what do you want to do, with the really high level goals and objective focused questions. What does winning look like this week? What's your big focus coming up? She's really involved in our OKR development process too, so she is in there with me. But one of the things that she did this year at the end of the year that just knocked my socks off is 2 things. She did kind of like a calendar audit, like you were talking about, and then paired that with decision stream. So asking me some of those high level calendar questions over what's working well on my calendar, what's not working, what do we need to shift, but did that through all of the different facets of our relationship, and the way all the different pieces of the business that she touches, so that she had all of my feedback in a really easy for me to share format, but then an easy for her to process format too. And she spun that into a self-review for herself. That was it was not just about how she's feeling in her job and the things that she thinks she's good at and the things that she'd like to continue working on, but she did a very data-driven review over how she's tangibly helped base grow in this year, and then spun that into, here's where I'd like my role to go in 2021 and beyond. And it was so helpful for me as I was preparing for 2021, but also year in review discussions with her. But I think the biggest thing that I'd like to share, just from my vantage point of as working with her as her executive, but also her manager, with her being able to lay all of that out really clearly for me of what she wanted, what she's working towards, what she needs, Otherwise, I would have just been making assumptions or guesses, and we might have gone in a different direction in that conversation. But because she laid it all out so clearly for me, we ended up having this really, really great conversation that, to your point, Jeremy, built on all of the other mini micro conversations that we have throughout the year, both live in our one-on-ones and Slack and decision stream. But I'm so impressed to see how she's really stepped up and advocated for herself this year. So one of the things that we talked about is her being in more of these events. So everybody watching, you'll be seeing a lot more of Natalie coming up, which we're really excited about. So yeah, I could go on and rave about her for a long time, but I do have to jump in 2 minutes, and there are a handful of questions that people sent in advance. And we'll probably only have time for me to tee up one of these for you, but I want to get to some of them. So I'm going to read this one, and then Liz is going to come back on, and we'll wrap up some of these questions that people sent in and get to some of the live Q&A too. So this question is, I've heard the main difference between an in-office EA and a virtual EA is intentional communication with your executive. My executive and I have created new systems to communicate since being virtual, but what should I keep in mind about intentional communication as we continue into even more months of being virtual? So I know this is something you've thought a lot about, and I'd love to hear your response.
Yeah, I mean, I think try to put yourself in your executive's shoes, and then write out what you're wanting to communicate, and then read that in your executive's shoes. And so as you're reading it in their shoes, are there things that you're like, skip, this is boring, I don't care, this is not a big deal, like you likely, if you've worked with your executive for any amount of time, you likely have an idea of what they really care about, what they don't. And just always try to communicate what they want to know. So, if you coordinated this crazy, 15-person meeting with all these different parties, and it was just a back and forth, whatever, they don't care. Like, they don't care that it took you 4 days and 10 emails to do this meeting. All they care about is that the decision maker at that company is going to be on the call, and this is what they know about our product, and this is what they don't know. And, whether or not they are going to be the ones leading the demo, or if your sales VP is going to lead the demo, that's what they care about. So just always try to see things from their perspective before you just write out a long email or a decision stream to send over. And then
totally.
Also, if you have little questions for them, try to answer them. And really honestly think, could I just answer this myself? Do I really need them to speak into this?
Yeah. Oh, I lost you for a second. There's Liz.
Hey guys. Okay, Paige, I know you have to hop off. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. And for those of you watching, we are hopping into Q&A right now. Give Paige a bunch of likes, heart emojis.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much, Paige. Okay. All right, guys, we are hopping into Q&A right now. We have so many questions, so I will be sure to try and get to all of them. I've been pulling them through the chat, keep adding them into the chat, and then we have a bunch that y'all sent ahead of time as well that we'll want to get to. So, Jeremy, I'm going to hop to some of the ones that were sent ahead of time, if that works for you.
Yep.
Okay. All righty. Okay, being that we are resetting ourselves in the new year, what sort of questions or how can you start a conversation with your executive during your one-on-one about goal setting, their goals, mission, vision, etc., so that we EAs can align ourselves with theirs? I know we've touched on this a lot, but I think what a lot of folks are looking for, and you know this too, is like almost like a step-by-step. Like, how do you start that conversation? I mean, I know you said before too, that one-on-one time, Paige has said this as well, it's really your time to own. Like, that is your specific time to own that agenda and what's discussed. But I'll let you go ahead and take it.
Yeah, I mean, it's specifically about goals is what they're asking.
Yes.
How to align your goals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this might sound wrong, but like I don't really have goals. My goals are
not true. I don't believe that. You have a book. You have a podcast. We all love you here. You got goals.
I'm saying with my executive.
Okay.
I don't have goals. My goals are his goals. So whatever he wants to do, I'm going to do. My one goal is to do everything in my power to make those goals happen. So I see my goals as his goals. So I don't even try to write out my own goals. I look at his OKRs. I look at his KPI where he's the directly responsible individual. And I do what I can to make sure that he's got the time and the energy to focus on those things. And then I do what I can to support those goals. So, and there's some personal goals too that he has. So I do what I can to support those personal goals because I'm also his personal assistant. So I know that it might sound like a cop-out, but like your executive is likely pretty documented on, their goals. And if not, you can help them do that. Like you can learn, there's a goals chapter in my book from Jillian Huffnagel, who's a goals expert. She talks through how to go through the OKRs and everything. Reach out to her for some intense OKR goal coaching if you need to really bring her in even to help your executives freaking figure out this whole goal thing for the organization, because that's a big deal for growing organizations. You kind of see these younger, smaller companies growing up and, putting their big boy pants on, if you will, and having to actually write down their goals. So do what you can to learn about the OKR process, learn about sprints and how big companies and small companies and medium-sized companies manage and track goals, and then help your executive do that with theirs. Now, you can have personal, I might have had a goal like, I wanted to set a meeting that turned into a sales opportunity that turned into revenue that was more than my salary. That might have been one of my goals. But you see how that's aligned. That's a specific measurable goal, but that aligns with my executive's goal of growing our revenue.
Right.
So it's not like, it's just kind of how can I specifically help us grow our revenue?
And I see some folks. Yes. And I see some folks asking about OKRs. Those are objectives and key results. And in the follow-up email, I will send what Jeremy was talking about, that excerpt in his book. So we'll provide a link to that. So that way you can get his book. And then we also did, right after our summit in November, I think we did an OKR session with an OKR consultant. So I'll provide that too, so you guys have access to that. And I know I've said this a million times, but our 30-day challenge is specifically designed to align yourself with your executive's OKRs. So I'll include that in follow-up too.
Yeah, it's chapter 15 of the book. I was just looking because I couldn't remember what chapter it is.
I'll note that too. Okay.
So chapter 15 is the goals chapter from Jillian.
Awesome. Another question we have.
And I will say like Tracy commented about main goals are your executives, but then you also have personal goals like training, etc. Yeah, you can break it down into bite-sized personal things like I want to get trained in whatever. But I will say that specifically in regards to training, the training that I try to get and the professional development that I try to do is specifically related to his goals still. So like it may be reading a sales book, it may be reading a book on OKRs, it may be taking a Harvard course on project management or whatever it is that can directly apply to his goals. That's where I'm gonna focus my personal training or personal development.
There's another question that keeps coming through. What do you recommend in situations where an admin's focus is allocated across multiple leaders, not necessarily weighted to one?
Yeah, so I talk a little bit about this. I think it's chapter 21 of my book. But basically, the idea is you need to have the expectations clarified and your role clarified as far as who trumps who. if anyone. So do you work for, X executive, and then Y and Z executive you support as well, but they answer to X executive? So if that's the case, then there's kind of this hierarchy of your role and your responsibility and your priorities. If you're kind of supporting 5, peer level leaders, then you may have to go to their next level up, or to the overall goals of the company, and say, okay, well, if one of these leaders is in the sales department and the next 6 months everybody's focused hardcore on revenue, then I should probably prioritize just a little bit that sales VP for the next 6 months. Or if hiring 100 people is our goal for the next 3 months, then I should kind of elevate that VP of HR that I support when it comes to priority rank. And just make sure you're open. And it looks like somebody just says Facebook user, but supports 8 executives that are all VPs. So yeah, make sure it's all open communication. Everybody knows, like, hey, these are the different people I'm supporting. And then during this season, during this quarter, this is kind of the little bit of a priority rank of who's who. And but you also, if you know the goals of the organization, you should be able to know, like, okay, if one of the VPs has a meeting with the CEO and the other VP has a meeting with another VP, and you have to kind of move one of them, if it was me, I would choose to not inconvenience the CEO over inconveniencing one of the VPs, just because their time is literally worth more, because the company is paying the CEO more than they're paying other people. And so you've got to allocate the resources and steward those resources well.
Definitely. I think if you're feeling spread thin too, I'd love, Jeremy, for you to dive into some more advice around maybe how you advocate for more support for yourself, or maybe any examples or use cases of things that you've done to advocate for more resources or to shift focuses, and what those conversations have looked like.
Yeah, I think about outsourcing, whether it's to technology, whether it's to a specialist in one area. Like, for example, if you're supporting 8 VPs and there's a big company-wide, this isn't a great COVID example, but a company-wide on-site lunch, and you've got to get lunch for 200 people, why not just outsource that to a catering company or an event company or somebody, or call a business and say, listen, we got 200 people on this date, can you make it happen? Versus spending all your energy and time doing all of that process. Maybe it's outsourcing to technology. Maybe there's an AI tool. Maybe there's a software like Base that you can put all 8 executives' information in one place. You can kind of automate some of those processes. Maybe some of those VPs you could set up automated calendar, like Calendly, calendly.com, and have them set up their meetings, some of their meetings, like maybe internal meetings, for example, all automatically, or automagically, as I like to say. But maybe you can do that for some of those meetings that aren't as people, hands-on. Like if you're supporting a CEO, for example, and you're scheduling meetings with other VIPs, you're not going to say, oh, here's a Calendly link, find a time. You're going to say, hey, here's my assistant, and you're going to really provide a lot of care in that interaction. So you don't want to automate all of the calendar invites, but you might be able to do some. So yeah, any way you can automate things, any way you can outsource things, and then when you go to your executive, if you have to go to your executive and say, listen, I want to sign up for a tool called Zapier, Zapier. It's a workflow automation tool, and it'll save me 1 hour a day, documenting, such and such. Then you can say it only costs $50 a month or whatever, and it's going to save me an hour a day. can I sign up for this? And it's going to maybe it saves you an hour per week per executive. So that's 8 hours per week, So anytime you can utilize and outsource to technology or people, that's a great way. Because a lot of times the first thing people will think is they're not going to hire somebody to help me. Like they're not going to hire another assistant. There's a reason I have 8 VPs because they're cheap or whatever.
But that may be to your point, that may not be what you need.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, don't just jump to the next logical conclusion of we just need to hire somebody. Maybe you can hire a part-time VA. Maybe you can outsource to an event planner. There are a lot of options besides just hiring another full-time employee. And your executives in the HR department and the CFO will definitely love to hear those options first.
I have a question for you. Have you ever presented something like that? Like, hey, I want to use this because it will save XX time. Have you ever been told no? That you can't?
I mean, I might have been told no when I had asked for another assistant at my last role. But typically it's not a no, it's okay, are you sure? Or it's let's sign up for a free trial for a few months and see if that software really helps. Or it's but if your executive is a good leader, they'll say, well, why do you want this? What's the root behind the reason why you want this tool? Is it because, and they might dig in a little deeper and you might be like, well, that's because you're lazy and you don't want to do things a different way or whatever. But if you have a good justification of like, listen, I want to help you, again, make it about them. I want to have more time to sit in meetings that you don't want to be in. So anyway, that's kind of what I would say.
Do you do any, some folks have been asking about particular audits that you may perform in terms of looking at how you can improve workflows or even ways to find different data points to advocate for yourself for a raise or for more resources. Do you do that on a regular basis, or is it like a quarterly thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, I always, pretty much every month, or all the time, really, I'm just thinking, if there's something that I do repeatedly, my gut is like, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to automate this. There's got to be a way. So just be aware of what you're doing over and over. Are you sending the same email over and over and over? Quit typing that same email over and over. Use a keyboard shortcut to copy and paste that email and then adjust the dates. If you're on Google, use a template and just pop in that template and then adjust the date. Like, I don't ever type the email, hi, so-and-so, nice to meet you. Here are some times that my executive's available. Let me know what works for you and I'll send an invite. Thanks. I don't ever type that anymore. I have a template that I plop in and then I add their name and I change the dates and hit send. As far as auditing the calendar, for example, I used to do it manually where I'd literally go in and look at all the meetings that they had over the last several months. And then I would just type them into a spreadsheet and enter the data. Well, now I have Zapier that automatically logs every event that ends. I was doing every event that was scheduled for a while, but I saw somebody commented like, we reschedule meetings so much, like how do you even keep track? Well, Zapier has a way that you can actually log the events when they end. So like right after the event ends, it logs it. So then I know that those events actually happened. So anyway, that's something that I've done too, is just that process only takes me, there's still a little bit of manual stuff to do, but it only takes me about 2 hours to audit the entire year versus before it would take me like a whole week straight of just like all day trying to go through and count and color coordinate and all the stuff. So anything you're doing repetitively, from little things like copy and paste to bigger things like an AI software tool to automate things, to outsourcing to other people, to specialists, always be thinking about how you can automate before you're automated.
Awesome. We have some folks asking a couple that they may have jumped in late, that you report on the amount of time in meetings versus this year versus last year. Is there a specific tool that you use for that? We've had a couple questions come through
for the
that.
audit. Yeah. So if you go to track.assistanceguide.com, I have a free kind of video course where I walk through exactly how I do it. Now, the caveat is I don't use Office 365. I don't use Microsoft. It's all Google. So basically the short version is Google Calendar. When an event ends in Google Calendar, I have a tool called Zapier, Zapier, that logs the data from that event into a Google spreadsheet. And then, so that's the three parts. So it's Google Calendar, Zapier, spreadsheet. And then once the data is in the spreadsheet, I've set up some conditional formatting, I've set up some formulas, and I've set up some pie charts and stuff like that kind of auto update. And then I just keep going through and cleaning up some of the data here and there. But that's how I do it. Now, I know that Zapier has integrations with Outlook as well. I just personally have never tried to use it the same way I'm using this. But if you check out that course, track.assistanceguide.com, free course, I walk through how I do that with Google, Zapier, Google Calendar, Zapier, and Google Sheets. But again, Outlook, I'm sure would work. I've actually been challenging assistants for the last 2 years that are in the Outlook world to figure it out and share with others, because everybody keeps asking. And I personally just don't have time to learn Microsoft. That's like my least favorite thing in the world, is dealing with Microsoft. So I'd love to send a free book or an assistance lead T-shirt or something to somebody that would put together a quick tutorial on how to do it with Outlook and Zapier. But anyway, that's what I use.
Awesome. We have time for just a couple more questions, guys. So I will try and get to as many as I can, but if you have some, feel free to put them in the chat. We had a couple folks ask ahead of time about the difference between supporting millennial CEOs and those CEOs that are not millennials. And I think sometimes there's some overlap with, or a lot of times overlap with, millennial CEOs and SaaS CEOs or tech CEOs. And so I'd love for you to share your thoughts on how you approach to bring it back to some of these game-changing questions. Do you find that there's a difference between approaching those types of game-changing questions with millennial CEOs versus maybe a more traditional CEO? And what's your advice for those that may not support a millennial CEO?
Yeah, I mean, think about it like this. You likely spent some time over the holiday, maybe virtually, unfortunately, but with your parents or your in-laws or your crazy uncle, whatever, whoever it is. You likely spent some time recently with, or at least on a phone call with an older family member. So my point is, you can still ask the same questions, but you're going to ask things differently to somebody that is a different generation than you are to somebody younger. You might be more respectful. You might be less accusatory. Yeah, I just think they may want some time to think about it. I wouldn't get too hung up on it. I would still try to have the conversations, be respectful, but your executive. They may want to see, some people work differently where they like to see these things before the meeting so that they can prepare before the meeting so they're not surprised in the meeting. So if your executive's like that, send them ahead of time the questions and say, hey, I'd like to go over these questions with you in our meeting next week or whatever. Some executives are don't want to think about it and just want to show up and wing it. Just kind of know know your executive, and then, but yeah, just be respectful for the older generation. Be respectful. Be patient. They may not be able to pick things up as quickly. Yeah. So.
Awesome.
Somebody's track.assistance, not ASSISTANCE, but assistance like assistance. That's how you spell it. Track.assistanceguide.com.
Awesome. Thanks. And yeah, sorry, on our end, Facebook has their data restrictions, so we can't see your names if you're on Facebook in the chat.
Yeah.
But I do have the chat pulled up here. So I believe that was Jane. So Jane, that's what we're correcting there. Well, Jeremy, was there anything else that you wanted to share with the group today? I've taken notes on all of the different resources that you've provided. So for everyone watching, I will make sure to include all of those resources in the follow-up email. If you do not have Jeremy's book yet, it is fantastic. And it is the ebook is available as well. Yes. There you go. The Leader Assistant. And of course, his podcast is wonderful as well. I'll be sure to include links for all of that in our follow-up material. But Jeremy, I'd love to give you the last couple of minutes to share anything else or plug anything that you have upcoming.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining on a Wednesday afternoon, depending on your time zone. Hopefully it was helpful. I do want to say, if your executive is resistant to these types of conversations, there's probably a reason why. And so really try to dig into that, really try to, go slow, one at a time, every couple weeks. You don't need to ask all 5 of these questions in one thing. But one way to kind of frame the conversation is to say, hey, I've been really investing in my personal and professional development lately. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to gather feedback so that I can be a better assistant and then I can better support you. And one of the ways that has been suggested that I kind of do this is to ask some questions. And so is it okay if I ask you a couple of questions? Mm-hmm. That's kind of a way to frame it for those executives that are resistant and hard to talk to. But it also honestly, there's assistants that do this process and then they realize their executive is just not the right executive for them. And they just realize they need to find a different executive or find a different role because they're just not a partner, And so a lot of times they will, it'll kind of illuminate the reality of the situation. And which is helpful. It's hard. It's not easy. But it's you would rather know that now than 10 years from now. And that's why I like these questions. But yeah, as far as, check out the book, check out the podcast. We actually have a lot of events coming up this year. I'm about to publish an event schedule here this week or early next week. We're going to have a big event on Administrative Professionals Day. So yeah, just check out leaderassistant.com, sign up for the email list so you can stay up to date on all those events and resources, and reach out if you have any questions. Ping me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email, hello@leaderassistant.com, and I'd love to connect.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you everyone for joining today. As y'all know, we have launched an official event calendar as well. So make sure you check that out. I also dropped a link in both the Facebook and YouTube chats for tomorrow's Base Live demo with our other favorite Jeremy White, our VP of Product and co-founder at Base. He'll be walking through how you can ask a lot of these questions to your executive using our Decision Stream tool. That'll just be a quick live session. So if you want to hop on, it'll be about 20 minutes. I dropped the link there too. And again, I will provide all of the wonderful resources that Jeremy Burrows has provided for us today in our follow-up email. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Liz. Have a good